Genesis 20. Now Abraham journeyed from there toward the land of the Negev. And he settled between Kadesh and Shur. Then he sojourned in Gerar. Abraham said of Sarah, his wife, guess what? She's my sister. Well, that sounds like deja voodoo. So Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent back and he took Sarah, but God came to Abimelech in a dream of the night and he said, behold, you're a dead man because of the woman you have taken, for she is married. Now Abimelech had not come near her, and he said, Lord, will you slay a nation even though blameless? Did he not himself say to me, she's my sister, and she herself say, he's my brother? In the integrity of my heart and the innocence of my hands, I have done this. Then God said to him in the dream, yes, I know that in the integrity of your heart you have done this. I also have kept you from sinning against me. Therefore, I did not let you touch her. Now therefore restore the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he'll pray for you, and you'll live. But if you do not restore her, know that you shall surely die, you and all who are yours. So Abimelech arose early in the morning and called all his servants and told all these things in their hearing, and the men were greatly frightened. Then Abimelech called Abraham and said to him, what have you done to us? How have I sinned against you, that you have brought on me and my kingdom a great sin? You have done to me things that ought not to be done. And Abimelech said to Abraham, what have you encountered that you have done this thing? Abraham said, because I thought surely there's no fear of God in this place, and they'll kill me because of my wife. Besides, she actually is my sister, the daughter of my father and not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. And it came about when God caused me to wander from my father's house that I said to her, this is the kindness with which you will show to me. Everywhere we go, say of me, he's my brother. Abimelech then took sheep and oxen and male and female servants, gave them to Abraham, and restored his wife Sarah to him. Abimelech said, behold, my land is before you, settle wherever you wish. And to Sarah he said, behold, I have given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. Behold, it is your vindication before all who are with you, and before all men you are cleared. Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech and his wife and his maids, so that they bore children. For the Lord had closed fast all the wombs of the household of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. You can be seated. When God saved Israel out of Egypt, of course, you know, they had been there 400 years. They were miserable, and God was actually responding. If you read Exodus, he was responding to the cries of his people who were making bricks for Pharaoh and just miserable there in Egypt in slavery. And yet after they're saved and they're following the Lord and they're in the wilderness, you remember they had a hard time. And more than once, numerous times, God says 10 times, they rebelled against him in the wilderness, and they would say things like, you know what, let's just go back to Egypt. Let's just go back. And there is this propensity in all of us who are Christians, who are really saved, to fall back into old ways, to go back to doing things we did before we were Christians, or maybe doing things that we never even did before we were Christians, because we still have three enemies, the world, the flesh, and the devil, and they're strong. And as long as you're in that human body of yours, you have an enemy right there within the gates, so to speak. And the world's all around us. And so Abraham, who has made so many steps of progress with the Lord, I mean, compared to Lot, Abraham, whoa, he looks great, right? Intercedes for him, and I mean, he's made some great moves of faith. Chapter 20 is not one of them. Chapter 20 is kind of a step or two back. Well, put this down if you would. If we walk with the lost, we fall into sinful ways. And if you put the word in settle now, don't settle short of holiness. Interesting there in verse 1. Abraham journeyed from where he was toward the land of the Negev. He had been living in Hebron. Remember the Oaks of Mamre, where he had been with the Lord, had that experience of having a meal with God and interceding for the inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah. But he left there toward the south country, which is what Negev means, and he settled between Kadesh and Shur, and he sojourned in Gerar. He had been living in Hebron for 20 years. Hebron, by the way, it's interesting, means fellowship. And he had been in fellowship, enjoying fellowship for a long time. And yet he decides to make a move down into enemy territory. He heads south is what he does, actually quite a ways south from where he was, down south of the Gaza Strip, if you're familiar with the geography of Israel, on the Mediterranean coast, almost all the way kind of toward Egypt. He's not in Egypt, but he's definitely heading south. And he goes to this Philistine city of Gerar. You know, maybe you've heard this expression I have, that the Christian life is like a greased pole. You ever heard that expression? Climbing a greased pole, I don't know, most of us have never done that. I actually have done that. When I was in 6th grade, they had a contest and they put a dollar bill on top of a tetherball pole, and then they covered it with Crisco. Not the dollar bill, but the pole. And whoever could shimmy up the pole could get the dollar bill if they could do it. Try that sometime, by the way. Not so easy to do. I thought I'd be smart and outsmart them all, so I got to the end of the line. I thought all the other kids, my friends, mostly boys, would go and shimmy up and get most of that Crisco on their clothes, and I would come up last and have the best chance for getting up. Good thinking, right? Except there was so little left, they re-Crisco'd the pole right before it was my turn. Oh, I'm so smart. And I just remember thinking, if there's any way humanly possible that I can get that dollar, if anybody's going to do it, I am, because my girlfriend was watching. She didn't know she was my girlfriend, but she had been my girlfriend since 2nd grade, just hadn't mentioned it to her. But anyway, so I decided I was going to get that dollar bill, and I remember I launched up, and if you touched your foot on the ground, you were out. And so as soon as I got up, I started going up, but within seconds, I started getting tired, and I started seeing I'm going down and getting closer to the ground. And so I started going faster and faster, and as long as I was giving every ounce of energy, I was moving up, but I would struggle, and I would start to go down. And finally, I remember I just went as hard as I could until I was almost there, and I reached up, and they had taped it down to I ripped it in half, and I got a half a dollar. But I was the only one who did that, you know, and so I'm still proud of it. I'm talking about it these many years later. But it's true. If you're not moving forward spiritually, you're sliding back. What the Bible calls backsliding in Jeremiah chapter 2. I don't know that anybody here is backsliding in your Christian life. Most people that are backsliding aren't showing up for church on Wednesday nights, but just because you're at church, maybe going, that's why I'm here. There's 2 grooves on my back lately, Bob. Things have not been good. I've been doing stuff I shouldn't be doing. But here we have a man of faith, a righteous man who believes God is an example to us, who's been walking in fellowship for 20 years, and for whatever reason, I don't know if he got bored. I don't know if what was attractive. Maybe it was the destruction of Sodom. We don't know. He decides it's time to move. And he moves among unbelievers. We know the Bible says he who walks with the wise will be wise, but a companion of fools will suffer harm. And we know the biblical definition of a fool, right? The one who says in his heart there's no God. By the way, it's great. Resurrection Sunday this year is on April Fool's Day. I love that. I just can't wait for it. But I like it every year, whatever day it falls on. Put this down, though. The devil knows your weaknesses. He knows your weaknesses. Verse 2, Abraham said of Sarah, his wife, she is my sister. Doesn't sound like even anybody asked him. just right from the beginning. I think he put a name tag right on her. You know, my sister. So when Abimelech, king of Gerar, heard about it, when he went and sent and took her after he announced that it was his sister. Now there's no threat. He just responds that way. This is the exact same sin, really, that he committed 25 years earlier. Remember when he was down in Egypt with Pharaoh? It reads like same story. In the New Testament, we're told to put on the full armor of God that we might stand firm against, the King James says, the wiles of the devil. The word for wiles there in the Greek is the word methodios, where we get our word methods. We need to be fully armed, expecting to be attacked, because there is an enemy who, as God said to the devil in the book of Job, have you considered my servant Job? Good and upright, eschewing evil. Have you looked at him? Yes, I have, is what Satan said. I have been checking out Job. And it's an interesting word. When God said, have you considered, the word considered is a word that would be used of a general who's about to attack a fortified city, and he's sending out spies to see what's the weakest place? What's the area of vulnerability that I can get in? And God said, have you looked at Job for a place to attack him? He says, oh, you bet I have. Let me touch him. Let me take his wealth. Let me touch his body. Remember, skin for skin, I'll take him out. And God said, you can touch him, but you can't have him. You can't kill him. The devil has, when I was in police work, we called it an MO. They probably still do, a method of operation in each one of our lives. A little different how he works in your life and in my life. We all have our own areas of weakness, and you're only as strong as your weakest point. I mean, if you do any kind of work in security, you go out and talk to people about their homes or their businesses, the question isn't how many bars you have on this window. The question is, what's with this latch that doesn't latch on your back door? Your security system is worthless, except that it's completely strong, you see. And so it is that the devil studies you. He knows, here's the area where, it might be in the area of fear. For some of us, that might be the area. He nails us in, and we worry and we fret. It might be in the area of some temptation, maybe giving into drinking when you're depressed, or lust, or gossip, or lying. Remember in ancient Greek mythology, there was Achilles. And the story of Achilles, how he was dipped into the river. And everywhere the water was, he was protected. The river Styx, S-T-Y-X. He was dipped in there, and he was held by his heel, what we call the Achilles heel. But there was, where the fingers were on his heel, was not covered. It didn't get wet. And so the poisonous arrows could be shot right there. You see, that one little area of weakness becomes the place of vulnerability. And here, because of fear and a lack of integrity, Abraham begins to walk by sight rather than by faith. It's very interesting. If you think about the timing, what has God just told Abraham less than really just a short while before? You're going to have a son. It's finally time. Your wife Sarah, not Hagar, but your wife Sarah, she's going to have a baby. And before that promise has been fulfilled, he goes down and he pawns his wife off as his sister to another man. And that is beyond crazy, isn't it? Abraham stopped asking what is right, what is the right thing to do, and he started asking what is the safe thing to do, and it'll cost him his character in this chapter and his testimony. Jot down Psalm 25, first 3 verses. Psalm 25, verses 1 through 3. Psalm of David, to you, O Lord, I lift up my soul, O my God, in you I trust. Do not let me be ashamed. Well, he will be. But David prayed, don't let me be ashamed. Don't let my enemies exult over me. Indeed, none of those who wait for you will be ashamed. Those who deal treacherously without cause will be ashamed. And that describes Abraham in this text. I want to talk to you a little bit tonight about integrity and what integrity is. He wants to do what is safe, and that is all of our human nature, to seek out safety and security. But see, he'll lose his testimony because after all, how can you talk to your neighbor about the truth if you're living a lie? You're not going to try that. Lot lost his witness down in Sodom. Remember, he had no influence even over his own future sons-in-law. They thought he was joking when he talked about judgment coming. None of his neighbors, were going to leave Sodom. Lot lost his witness in Sodom, but Abraham lost his witness in Gerar. Somebody wrote this, and it's absolutely true. A bad man's example has little influence over good men, but the bad example of a good man, eminent in station and established in reputation, which is who Abraham is, has an enormous power for evil. Paul said, keep your conversation, your way of life, excellent among those that are outsiders. Be careful about the way you act around unbelievers. Not to be fake and to pretend you're holier than you are. We're to live uprightly, but we're to realize people are watching. Unbelievers are watching you. You might not think they are, but believe me, they are. Someone said, problem with a lot of people, they haven't become Christians because they've never met a Christian. Someone said, yeah, and the problem with the others is they have. Well, that's sad. Put this down, letter B. God's blessings come on the one with integrity. Put on the word blessings. Jot down Proverbs 28 and verse 6. Proverbs 20. Better is the poor who walks in his integrity than he who is crooked, though he be rich. Now, I'm using and throwing the word integrity around. I want to define it for you. Integrity is been defined as an unimpaired condition or soundness and adherence to a code of moral values, the quality or state of being complete or undivided, integrated. They said, what is integrity? It's solidness, soundness, and firmness. Just the easiest way to think about what integrity means, obviously we think of being honest, but is the word integer. An integer is a whole number. And a man or a woman of integrity is a whole person. That is, their character is through and through. It's not just something they say they believe or they believe when it's convenient, but they believe it all the time. So put this down, the person who has integrity receives divine revelation. You know, what's interesting to me is who the example is in our text. It's not Abraham. It's Abimelech, who's not even saved. But he is the one who has integrity in the passage. Beginning in verse 3 then, but God came to Abimelech in a dream of the night. And he said to him, behold, you're a dead man because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is married. Interesting. Abimelech, first of all, we see because he's not doing anything wrong in the text, he gets God's revelation. Jot down Job 33, verses 14 through 17. Indeed, God speaks once or twice, yet no one notices it. In a dream, a vision of the night, when sound sleep falls on men while they slumber in their beds. Then he opens the ears of men and he seals their instruction. Abraham, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't finish it. And that he may turn man aside from his conduct and keep man from his pride. This exactly describes what God is doing for Abimelech as he's coming to this man and giving him insight as to what's going on. A word of knowledge, really, to Abimelech. So Abraham becomes the example in our text of what not to do. And by the way, this is the first time the word integrity is used in your Bible. You know, the problem with a lot of, I think, in our culture nowadays is this mindset that, especially with politics and leaders, it really doesn't matter so much about their personal character. What matters is their professional capacity, you know. What are they doing with the economy? What are they doing in terms of championing our rights with certain things? So we stand behind people whose moral character is in question, but that's not what the Bible teaches. The Bible teaches God is not mocked, and whatever a man sows, that he shall also reap. Put this down. He receives not only divine revelation, but divine protection. Divine protection. In verse 6, God said to him in the dream, yes, I know that in the integrity of your heart you have done this, and I also have kept you, protected you from sinning against me. Therefore, I didn't let you touch her. You didn't know it. You were trying to have a sexual relationship with Sarah, but I prevented it, whether it was sickness or who knows, whatever it was. God says, hey, I actually was working. You had no idea. But because you were walking in integrity, I protected you. That's important to remember. A person of integrity experiences God's revelation, but also God's protection. Jot it down, Proverbs 10 and verse 9. He who walks in integrity walks securely, but he who perverts his ways will be found out. And by the way, the Bible teaches not only if you walk in integrity will God protect you, but it'll actually protect your family. Proverbs 20 and verse 7. Proverbs 20 verse 7. A righteous man who walks in his integrity How blessed are his sons after him. So it's a blessing that goes beyond yourself. You know, everybody, all of his friends wanted Job just to admit something. What did everybody want Job to admit? That he had sinned, that these consequences had come into his life because of some sin. They didn't know what it was, but there had to be some sin because God is bringing discipline or judgment on you. And you know, it's interesting. Remember, you know the story how Job's wife wants him just to get it over with. Really, just why don't you just die? I feel like dying. Why don't you die? You know. And but she says something very interesting to him. She said, "Do you still retain your integrity? Curse God and die." Now, what does she mean? Do you still maintain your integrity? That you haven't sinned, you see. Because all of your friends are saying you sinned, and I think it's pretty obvious you have, but you won't admit it. Even his own wife wasn't believing in him, you see. Jot down Job 27, verses 5 and 6. "Far be it from me," Job said, "that I should declare you who are telling me I've sinned, right. Till I die, I will not put away my integrity from me. I hold fast my righteousness and will not let it go. My heart does not reproach any of my days." So integrity is a decision you make about the truth, that shading it is not an option. But you receive divine revelation, if you need it, and divine protection. Put this down. He receives divine direction in verse 7. "Now, therefore," God's going to tell him what to do about it. "Restore the man's wife, for he is a prophet." It's a little bit non-prophet in this chapter, "and he will pray for you, and you will live. But by the way, you have to do it. If you don't restore her, know that you shall surely die, you and all who are yours." Jot down Proverbs 11 and verse 3. "The integrity of the upright will guide them, but the crookedness of the treacherous will destroy them." So, interesting. By the way, this word integrity in the Hebrew is kind of interesting. It's the word, we would pronounce it tom, and it's a word that technically, in its root form, means complete. It comes from the word that you may be more familiar with, which is thummim. Thummim. Now, the word thummim is actually normally translated perfection. So you have heard of the Urim, some people say Urim, but it's pronounced Urim, and the Thummim. The Urim and the Thummim, we don't exactly know what they were, except that they were evidently a means by which many people believe they were lots that the high priest wore in his ephod that he would cast, and various interpretations as to what would happen. Some believe that tribal stones would light up and God would direct the nation of Israel through the high priest's direction. But the lots that were cast are called the Urim and the Thummim. Urim means lights, from Ur, is Hebrew for light. And Thummim, where this word tom means perfection. So the lights and the perfection. Very interesting, because it's through the lights and the perfection God would give divine supernatural direction to the high priest. And God is giving to this man, because of his integrity, direction. He's showing him what to do. I want to know what I should do. God says, walk in your integrity. I'll protect you. I'll direct you. I will guide you. That's what we need. Put this down, number 4. Obedience is integrity's immediate reaction. Verse 8. So, after God spoke to him in the dream, Abimelech arose early in the morning, called all of his servants, told all these things in their hearing, and the men were greatly frightened. Who else got a dream of a warning from the Lord in the New Testament? Who do you think? Who? Peter? What was the warning? So that was a vision. Yeah, it was a vision. A dream. Yes? Paul, what was the warning? Go before the king. Okay. His nephew heard about a plot to kill him. I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to. A dream. Dream.
I don't know if it was a dream, but the Holy Spirit told saints not to go to a certain area in Asia and to
Okay. A warning through the Holy Spirit. Yes? What happened with Joseph? Yeah, there may have been others, but I'm thinking Joseph actually received dreams, Old Testament and New Testament, but Joseph in the New Testament actually receives 3 dreams. By the way, he never utters a word in the Bible, but every time he receives a dream, the first dream wasn't so much a warning as much as it was direction. It was, Mary, Mary, don't be contrary, is what God spoke to him through the dream, right? This is of the Holy Spirit. But each time you read in the New Testament there in Matthew, Joseph receives a dream. 2 of them were warnings. Don't go, about Herod trying to kill and taking the child and fleeing to Egypt. And then another warning that it was safe to come back and it was time to leave. But here and not to settle. Remember where he was in Nazareth, or in Bethlehem. Here's the point I want you to make. I want you to see. God gives dreams to the person who's walking in their integrity. Joseph is certainly a man like that. But in both cases, Old Testament, New Testament, in this case, there's immediate obedience. A person of integrity not only receives direction, they obey it. And it's almost like verbatim. As soon as he wakes up, he does it. That's exactly what it says of Joseph every time he does it. He woke up and he started praying about it, thinking about it, pondering. No, he just does it. He's a does it kind of guy. And that is a description of a person. God, I'm going to do your will. I'm not trying to find out your will so I can decide if I really want to do it. I think a lot of people, I want to know your will. God, I want your perfect will. I want to decide if it is what I want to do. Oh, no. Let me help you with that. You want to know the unknown will of God? Obey the known will of God. Read Romans chapter 12. Paul says, I urge you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your body a living and holy sacrifice, acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. Don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you might be able to discern or prove what the will of God is, that which is good, acceptable, and perfect. If I want to know the unknown will of God, I have to first obey the revealed will of God. So the idea is the child of God said, God, I'm going to do it. I just need to know what it is. And a person who's walking in integrity has already made that decision. So even if it doesn't make sense, if they don't want to do it, it doesn't matter. I'm a servant, so I'm going to do it. So Joseph in the New Testament takes action practically as soon as he hears God speak to him privately. That's also true of Abimelech. Put this down, number 5. Integrity calls sinners to confess without condemnation. Look at verse 9 and verse 10. Then Abimelech called Abraham, and he said to him, what have you done to us? And how have I sinned against you, that you have brought on me and my kingdom a great sin? You have done to me things that ought not to be done. The passage, I don't have it for the screen, but the passage to write down next to that, to me, is Matthew 18:15. Remember, Jesus said, if your brother sins, go and what? Well, reprove him in private. And that's really what Abimelech is doing here. He calls it a sin. He says, what you did was not right. I'm just telling you, it was not right. A lot of people don't do that. Somebody sins against you, well, I'll just avoid them. The Bible doesn't say to avoid them. It says go talk to them. Well, I don't want to talk to them. I want them out of my life. Boundaries, I read the book. Well, that's not what Jesus said. Besides, if I talk to them, they're just going to get mad at me, and then they're going to be all upset, and it probably won't work anyway. Jesus didn't say it would work. He just told you to do it. He's not going to ask you in heaven, did it work? He's going to say, did you do what I told you to do? If your brother or sister sins, go and talk to him about it. Tell him. And Abimelech lays it out. But what's interesting to me is something that he says here, I don't want you to miss it, is that I sense he's trying to find out, why'd you do it? I want you to admit you did it. I know you did it. I want to know what's going on with you. Do you see that in the text? Look at it. Look, verse 10. Abimelech said to Abraham, what have you encountered that you have done this thing? I care about you. I don't just care about me and the problems that you're creating for my life, but I'd like to understand. I want to suggest to you, while he's looking for a confession, he's moving in compassion by seeking comprehension of what would cause the sin to have been done. Here's what he's basically kind of saying. There's no excuse for what you've done, but I do want to understand what motivated you. Whenever somebody wants to understand what's motivating you, at least if they're sincere, it's because they care about you, you see. And I appreciate that. A person of integrity who's going to call a sinner to confess, in this case Abraham, but not with condemnation. Put this down, letter C. See how integrity begins to disintegrate in our lives. Put in the word begins or starts. There are three statements that I want you to see that help us to understand what was going on in Abraham's mind that led to him having a lack of integrity. And quite often, we do the same things. We fall into these same errors. So three quotes, I'm kind of paraphrasing what I believe he's saying, and I'll show you in the text. First of all, he says, I was afraid. That will lead to you disobeying God. If you give in to your fear, you're going to have trouble. I was afraid. Verse 11, Abraham said, because I thought surely there is no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. That was all in his head. That was just there. I mean, first of all, okay, I still don't get how his wife at 90 years old is such a looker that every man on earth wants her. But okay, clearly the guy wanted her, so okay, that's pretty cool. I don't get any of that. But he presumed that if it was known that she was married, that he would be dead. We don't know that. Those are facts not in evidence. And he just said, I was afraid. Remember when God comes down and Adam and Eve are hiding, and he says, Adam, where are you? And of course, Adam, on the bush over here, you know. And he says, why are you hiding? Well, we're naked, you know. Who told you you're naked? Well, did you eat of it? It's very interesting when God starts to deal with Adam. Adam says, I was afraid. So I hid myself. Fear is often, by the way, fear and deception, fear and lies are two of Satan's big guns in your life and my life, always. They go together. Fear and lies. When Saul, the king of Israel, was commanded to wipe out the Amalekites, and God had his reasons in 1 Samuel 15 for doing so, that was kind of his big first mission. Go wipe out the Amalekites, destroy them utterly. We remember he didn't do it. He kept back some of the choice animals, and he kept who else alive? King Agag, me with a wooden spoon. King Agag. Brought him back as a war trophy. When Samuel was called by the Lord to call him on the carpet for not obeying the Lord, Saul is trying to pawn the whole thing off like he had obeyed the Lord. In fact, he comes out and he says to Samuel, God's prophet, blessed are you, because I have completely, like you got a good king on your hands to be a prophet for. I completely obeyed the Lord. And Samuel says, huh? What is this low? If you've obeyed, what's that about? So it's like, okay, the jig is up. He knows I didn't kill everybody and kill all the animals. And you know what Saul winds up? He gives a number of excuses, but one of them was, it was the people. It was the people I was with. And I was afraid of the crowd and what they wanted. I gave in. Now, maybe he was, or maybe he just used it as an excuse. But fear will lead you to giving up your integrity. If I tell the truth, I'll lose my job. If I tell the truth, I'll hurt this person. If I'm honest, I'm, gonna probably get a ticket or whatever, And yet, it's only the first of the three reasons. I was afraid. The second one, you might put it this way. Abraham speaking, it was only half a lie. Put in the word half and look at verse 12. Besides, in addition to that, I was afraid, she actually is my sister. You're upset with me because I said she was my sister? That's true. She's the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. She's my half-sister. So it's this like, it's only a half lie or a half truth, but the old saying is true. A half truth is a whole lie. I read about Edison. Interesting story. Thomas Edison was concerned about the way visitors to his office helped themselves to his expensive Havana cigars. Since he wouldn't lock them up, his secretary suggested he have cigars made from cabbage leaves and substitute them for the Havanas. Edison agreed, and then he forgot about it and only remembered later when the Havanas started vanishing again. When he asked his secretary why the bogus cigars hadn't arrived, she told him they had arrived and had been given to his manager, who, not knowing they were fakes, had packed them for Edison to take on a trip. And do you know, Edison laughed, I smoked every one of those cigars myself. That's the way deception works. You think you're solving a problem, and all you're doing is it's going to come back to you, no matter how you rationalize it in your mind. It was Abraham Lincoln who was talking to another politician once. He said, let's suppose you have a cow with 4 legs, but you decide to call its tail a leg. How many legs would the cow have? He said, well, I guess 5. He goes, no, that's where you're wrong. It would still only have 4. Just because you decide to call it a leg doesn't make it a leg. And that's really what's happening. Well, you know, she really is my sister. No, she's not. Jot down Proverbs 3, verses 3 and 4. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 3 and 4. We have that, guys, or no? All right. Do not let kindness and truth leave you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart, so you will find favor and good repute in the sight of God and man. And right after he says that is the verse we all know, trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your understanding. So the idea is, I'm going to be committed to truth, and now I'm going to have to not lean on my own understanding, because there are going to be times I'm going to want to shade the truth because it's going to go better for me. I was afraid, it was only half a lie, and then put this down. Abraham basically said, well, we always do this. Look at verse 13. It came about, he says, when God caused me to wander from my father's house. This is decades earlier. That I had said to her, this was our deal. This is the kindness with which you will show to me. Everywhere we go, say of me, he is my brother. It's interesting. Abraham goes to Gerar. He goes, well, these aren't Christians here. These aren't believers, rather. There's no fear of God in this place. And Abraham's the one who has no fear of God. What he does have is a fear of Abimelech. Proverbs 29 and verse 25, if you want to take all these verses down. It says, the fear of man brings a snare, but he who trusts in the Lord will be exalted. And if even Abraham can have a fear of man, you know that we can too, all of us. But here's the case. You think about the fact that this isn't the first time Abraham has done it. It's kind of his way. He and his wife, it's their way of doing things. It's been there in the past, and so you kind of take advantage of it. You've done it before, well, you fall back into it. Before God will bring the son of promise. Remember, he's about to be coming. Before God will bring the son, you might say he must first deal with the sin. Meaning this, that this was a root sin in Abram's life that had never really completely gotten dealt with down in Egypt. Oh, God moved in a dream for Pharaoh, but there was really, while there was a confession of it on Abraham's part, clearly he never forsook it. And I think there's something about this we need to realize. If we're going to have integrity, it's not enough to just admit when we do wrong and call it a sin. There needs to be something more, and I'll tell you what it is. Proverbs 28:13 mentions what it is. He who conceals his transgression will not prosper, but he who confesses and what? Forsakes them will find compassion. There was no broken heart in Abraham the first time. He'd gotten caught. There were consequences. A little embarrassing, but he got through it. But Psalm 51:17 says, the sacrifices of God are a broken and a contrite heart. And I think of Saul again in 1 Samuel 15. He finally says, okay, I've sinned. I said the S word, I did it. But there is no broken heart. He is still just as rebellious on the inside, just going through the motions. It was John Wesley who was once asked, why don't we see the miracles that were happening in the book of Acts happening in the church in his day, 1700s? His answer was he believed it's because of the carnality of the church. He said if the church were to get right with God, thoroughly right with God, he said, I believe God would be moving in every bit as much power as he was in the book of Acts. J. Vernon McGee said we'd see revival if the leaders in the church would be willing to confess their sins. And I think it's just true for the whole body of Christ. If we just be honest, what God would want to do instead of just going through the motions. Finally, put this down. Consider God's reproof and restoration in verses 14 through 18. Verse 14, Abimelech then took sheep and oxen and male and female servants, and he gave them to Abraham, and he restored his wife Sarah to him. And he said, hey, my land's before you. Settle wherever you please. Now, this sounds very generous, and I think it is, but of course it does sound like he's saying, go just wherever, leave here. Anywhere else would be good. I'm not sure he really wants him around too much, to be honest with you, but he is being extremely generous with him. And here's what I want to suggest to you is that he's practicing a New Testament principle. Jot it down, Romans 12, verses 20 and 21. Something that will not come natural to any of us in this room. If your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him a drink. For in so doing, you will heap burning coals upon his head. Don't be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Can you imagine how embarrassed Abraham must have been when God told Abimelech, and he found out about it, I'm sure afterwards, Abimelech, hey, by the way, this guy that did this to you, he's one of my representatives. Yeah, he's a prophet of God. In fact, if you want healing in your household, he'll have to pray for you. Do you get the feeling like maybe God's choosing to humble Abraham to have to be the one to go pray for healing? Because I'm such a man of God and I'm so close to God, you're not going to get any healing till me, the one who brought all this lie on you and consequences to your household, by the way, comes and prays for you. I think the last thing you want anyone to know is that you represent the Lord when you've sinned. I mean, isn't that true? Isn't that kind of just a natural reaction? You feel embarrassed. I think when a Christian with a not of this world bumper sticker or a he is greater than I emblem gets pulled over for breaking the speed limit and then gets lectured by a non-Christian about obeying the laws of the land, it's embarrassing. When a Christian gets audited by the IRS for bogus write-offs, it's embarrassing. When a Christian calls in sick and then is caught by his employer at the beach, you're going to get fired. I mean, it's embarrassing, right? Because it's the exact opposite of what we claim to believe in. And here, the world has more integrity than the man of God. And yet, God, in spite of it, I do believe he's humbling Abraham. He's also blessing Abraham. He said, I'm going to bless you, Abraham. I'm going to bless you all through your life. Even, in fact, sometimes, have you noticed God will use his blessings in your life when you've really blown it, when you don't expect anything good to come from the Lord, and then he blesses you to bring you to a point of saying, like Jacob did, I'm not worthy of the least of your mercies. You should have wiped me out, but you chose to bless me even when I was not bless worthy. By the way, do you notice the sarcasm? I do in verse 16. To Sarah, he said, behold, I have given your brother, is the way I think he must have said it. Yes, God told me who he really is, but he is your brother, which is the way she introduced him and he introduced himself. I've given him 1,000 pieces of silver. Behold, it is your vindication, in other words, that I haven't touched you. Before all who are with you, before all men, you're cleared, your record is cleared. It was Pastor Chuck who said the interpretation of what's being said here in the Hebrew is that Abimelech is saying to her, if Abraham has stumbled because of your beauty, go buy a veil. So, very interesting. But there are two final things I want to say and then we'll finish. Put this down. We need to remember that character counts. It matters to the Lord. It's not just about you and him, though. It's about our effect on an unsaved world. Chapter 20 is one of those chapters of your life you would just assume, God, would you just take that out of the Bible? But here it is. Thankfully, Abraham's going to continue to grow. He'll offer up his son in a couple of chapters, the high point of his faith. God will fulfill his promises to Abraham, not because Abraham is so perfectly faithful, because he's not, but because God is completely faithful. And so put this down, but God won't forsake us because of our failures. And I'm so glad for that, because everyone in this room has reason to be ashamed at times. And if you say, I've never had a reason to be ashamed, you should be ashamed of saying that then. Let me close with this. The following is a confidential report on several candidates being considered for positions of church leadership. There's Adam, good man, but problems with his wife. Also, one reference told of how his wife and he enjoy walking nude in the woods. There's Noah, former pastorate of 120 years with not even one convert, prone to unrealistic building projects. Abraham, though the references reported wife swapping, the facts seem to show he never slept with another man's wife, but did offer to share his own wife with another man. There's Joseph, big thinker, but a braggart, believes in dream interpreting and has a prison record. There's Moses, modest and meek man, but poor communicator, even stuttering at times. Sometimes blows his stack and acts rashly. Some say he left an earlier church over a murder charge. There's David, the most promising leader of all until we discovered the affair he had with his neighbor's wife. There's Solomon, great preacher, but our parsonage would never hold all those wives. Elijah, prone to depression, collapses under pressure. Elisha, reported to have lived with a single widow while at his former church. Hosea, a tender and loving pastor, but our people could never handle his wife's occupation. Deborah, strong leader, seems to be anointed, but she's female. Jeremiah, emotionally unstable, alarmist, negative, always lamenting things, reported to have taken a long trip to bury his underwear on the bank of a foreign river. You're saying, what's that about? You need to read the book. Isaiah, on the fringe, claims to have seen angels in church, has trouble with his language. Jonah refused God's call into ministry until he was forced to obey by getting swallowed up by a great fish. He told us the fish later spit him on the shore near here, and we hung up. Amos, too backward and unpolished, with some seminary training he might have promised, but has a hang-up with wealthy people. Might fit in better in a poor congregation. There's Melchizedek, great credentials at current workplace, but where does this guy come from? No information on his resume about former work records. Every line about parents was left blank, and he refused to supply a birth date. Then there's John, says he's a Baptist, but he definitely doesn't dress like one. Has slept in the outdoors for months on end, has a weird diet, and provokes denominational leaders. There's Peter, too blue collar, has a bad temper, even has been known to curse, had a big run-in with Paul in Antioch, aggressive, but a loose cannon. Paul, powerful CEO-type leader and fascinating preacher, however short on tact, unforgiving with younger ministers, harsh, and has been known to preach all night. James and John, package deal, preacher and associate, seemed good at first, but found out they have an ego problem regarding other fellow workers and seating positions. Threatened an entire town after an insult. Also known to try to discourage workers who didn't follow along with them. Timothy, just too young. Methuselah, too old, way too old. And then they also list Jesus. Jesus, he had popular times, but once his church grew to 5,000, he managed to offend them all. And then this church dwindled down to 12 people. Seldom stays in one place very long. And of course, he's single. Well, you can find a flaw with just about everybody, and a lot of those are pretty accurate if we're honest with those men and some of those women in the Old Testament. And yet God chooses flawed people because nothing will bring him more honor, more glory than to give you and me forgiveness, mercy. And Abraham's story doesn't end in chapter 20. He's going to continue to be used of God just like God wants to use you. So if you're here, and maybe it's not you, maybe you're not in any kind of a backslide at all, but you know somebody who is. You need to minister to them. You need to remember to not judge their Christianity if they have done something that looks like they're acting more like the world. Remember, Paul said to the church at Corinth, and they were saints, they were really believers. You're doing things and allowing things that the world doesn't do. David, when he sinned, Nathan said to him, "You've caused the enemies of God to blaspheme." So any of us and all of us will and can fall into this. We need to, instead of being discouraged by these things, remind ourselves that God doesn't give up on us. Even when others do, and when we feel like giving up on ourselves, the Lord's not done. Your story's not over. God is going to make you a trophy of grace. You have his word on it.